Oh, there's been trouble up on the mountain. Oh, darkness traveled all through that way.
Native women were here. Native women are life givers. We were the first teachers. We were the nurturers. We were the leadership. We were the spiritual foundation for ourselves, for our family, for the community, for the nation.
Hey, oh, hey, 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 oh, hey, 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 oh, hey, hey,
You know, when I think of the title for this film, when we, think about what that word Knisitotang means, it's really talking about an embodied knowledge that comes from relationship to the land.
We have a word for teaching called Kikinomagewin, which means to point towards and take direction from. But you can also say Akinomagewin. Aki is earth. Akinomagewin is to point towards the earth and take direction from the earth. It's so powerful, right? To think about that turtle, the back of the turtle is where life comes from with our creation story. And you think about those shallow seas where all these animals were struggling to live in the water, and yet they found refuge in one another and counsel together. And to think about the climate change that we're going through, and to know that we've got these stories of climate change that come from 440 million years ago, and all the evidence that we find of our searching for the land.
And I never really felt it when I was living in town, because I used to live in this big city. I used to live in Regina. And then when I moved down to the res, I kind of just felt this connection with nature. I was just suddenly surrounded by green. I was surrounded by trees. And it kind of felt like I was home, and I felt safe, and I felt happy.
You can learn from the land. You can learn from community and from our stories. Our stories are not simple folklore. Our stories are our theories. I started to shift my ideas of education through going back to our knowledges, going back and sitting with community outside of conventional schooling helped me to remember myself in relationship to land. It's something that you have to live. That's what my grandmother talked to me about doing when she was growing up. But because of residential schools, we were severed from that knowledge. So I'm still trying to kind of piece together those fragments. It's painful to feel that disconnection, want to learn, but not to have the people that have the knowledge right there with you to help guide you on that. That's the hard part, I think, for people who might be disenfranchised. They might be fostered out, or maybe they were adopted out.
If you had no books, how would you teach? That's what I'd like to see in my community. Back to the land, more universal, more global, but from an Indigenous perspective.
Indigenous education is a lot different. It's learning to be comfortable in the bush, whether you're in Panama, the Rockies, or the Peninsula. You have to be comfortable in the bush.
I come from a family of 8, and when my last sister was born, my mom got sick. She passed away. My father's mother took us all in, all of us. And she lived in a little log house. And people were coming, can we take this one? She wouldn't give any of us up. She says, I'm keeping them together. So that's kind of how I learned to keep your family close.
Me and my father always had very deep conversations. And he'd tell me stories to help guide me through situations, and I never thought I was listening to him. Little by little, I started learning that subconsciously that my mind was following the path that he was setting for me. I'd work things out on my own.
I spent a lot of time with my maternal grandmother, and I'm really grateful for that because she was a really amazing storyteller, and she would talk a lot about her upbringing, and she was a residential school survivor, and she grew up in the bush. Her parents were trappers, and she grew up that way until she went to residential school when she was 7. And these were just things that we talked about all the time. I remember her flannel pajamas and sleeping in her bed. And you know, every night I would be like, Grandma, tell me more stories.
The way that she told me our stories and the way that she talked to me about the culture, I was kind of astounded.
Our community are aunts and our uncles. Our community are our parents. Our community is the past generations. We're in community with them. The community is the water and the sky and the rocks and the earth. You know, this is our constitution, right? This is how we are constituted. If you think about this as a verb, right? How are we constituted? Of the water, of the rocks, of the trees, of the sky. That's Chinaakanagewin. That's the great guided way of making decisions. So, and then you can put that into ceremony, or you could put that into a classroom and teach someone Anishinaabe law. You could put it into a family. You know, there are different scales that this could operate. And even if Canada never lives by that constitution, you and your loved ones could live by that constitution.
There's a lot of us who are reluctant to speak our language. My grandfather, who I learned language from, was in day school. And my grandmother remembers all of the children who were lined up to get the strap because they were speaking the language. And my grandfather was one of those kids. My grandfather's feelings of not feeling worthy because he didn't have the education. And I learned, you know, how devastating this system has been, but also how resilient we are.
Today, I can't speak any of the language, although I know a lot of words. I like to take walks with the grandchildren in the bush, and I'll point out things that I do know. How do you say them in the language and that kind of thing. I grew up not knowing that I was even Anishinaabe. Our next door neighbors here spoke the language all the time. So the children generally spoke English, but they obviously knew what the parents were saying. We always relied on these friends to answer questions, what does this mean or what does that mean? And that was the extent of our learning the language. So I even had to learn what residential school was. And I probably was in my 30s sometime before I even knew what a residential school was.
I would like to see like my son's generations and those ones after to be able to say, I know what kind of tree that is, I know what kind of plant that is, I know where to go hunting, I know where to go fishing. It does come down to a lot of just being able to have that sense of identity.
There is nothing within this school system that reflects my experiences as Anishinaabe. I didn't exist in textbooks, history. I didn't exist in literature. My grade 11 English teacher told me that I was going to end up waste. I just took that as a challenge.
We have something to contribute to the world. Our knowledges have value. And bringing our knowledges into these institutions is very challenging. I will continue to try and get these institutions to make more space for us.
I felt like the things that they were doing back in grade 7 and 8 were stuff that, you know, off the reserve were doing in grades 5 and 6. I felt like I was contributing to a society that had no place for me. The setting wasn't there, you know what I mean? I didn't feel safe or comfortable within that setting.
There was a sense of shame for me in who I was and am, and I had to wrestle with that and make sense of that as I grew.
You know, my friends were getting put in these classes that were, you know, less than applied. Mm-hmm. They were getting stuck into this portable that was outside of the schoolyard. And it wasn't just Native kids, there were other kids, but it was like the problem group. I just wanted to be with my peers. So I just told them, put me in that class. The norms that they try to push us through in these education systems aren't what I wanted as my end game. Looking back, I was a child dealing with an issue much bigger than myself. So I just stopped contributing altogether.
It was a struggle all the way through school because I never really fit in. And I learned quickly it isn't about your abilities, it's about who you are. Who's your parents?
The Catholic Church and the federal government work side by side to take our land. They work side by side with the narrative of get rid of the Indian problem. Get rid of those Indians because we don't want them here. And they're the ones that did the dealings. And that's how the rest of Canada gets to prosper. On the backs of the mental, emotional, physical, sexual, and spiritual abuse of children for the last 7 generations of my relatives.
Well, the education system was set up, married to the other initiatives of the Crown to assimilate for Indigenous people into what they call the society.
We lost my grandfather to alcoholism, and that made him distance from our family, which caused me and my mother and siblings to not know anything from that side at all.
My aunt and uncle were a big part of the reason why I did ended up getting First Communion done. Felt like it was forced upon me. It always frustrated me how I can see our elders who still believe in that system, and they're still trying to push back the culture coming back onto the reserve. And that's where I'd say, like, it's a strained relationship.
And I certainly felt that bullying. I certainly felt being a part of that fighting side. And I suppose part of what got me through that again is just Uncle Norman and Aunt Norma and Uncle Howard and my mother. And
I guess I found my sense of indigeneity in the pockets of our small town. It was dominated by white settler, French, English populations and Indigenous peoples, Cree from the coast. There are a lot of First Nations people in our town, but we lived on the margins. I found refuge from that dominance in the Friendship Center. The Friendship Center was started by Cree women in the 70s, and my mom worked there for her entire life, and I was a Friendship Center kid. So I always knew that I was Indigenous, but I got a lot of messages that it was not good.
We've shared a lot with the education and other ministers about the necessity of implementing a form of First Nation education in the schools. By not having it there, it causes more animosity.
I would like to see more teachings to non-natives to know how it was in residential schools, so they would never bring that around again. The immigrants that are coming into our country, they know nothing about us. They don't know that we were the first inhabitants here.
Other nations can come to this country. They don't have to give up their language. They don't have to give up the way they dress. They don't have to give up their food. They don't have to give up their dances. They don't have to give up their ceremonies. And yet we have been stripped of that.
That was the alarming thing, was when I got a bit older, realizing just how many of my friends had been in the foster care system. How many kids from the reserve here that actually were foster care kids. A lot of it is all just stemming from generational trauma.
I can see that it's still going on with the welfare system. Children are being taken away from their families and into non-native homes. That should stop.
We've had to deal with CAS. When we were living in Chesley that last time, I didn't want to send them to school if I didn't have carrots and cucumbers to send with them. What was heard on the phone was that I can't take care of my child. And so we had a whole thing to deal with CAS. Would this be the same situation had it been a non-native kid?
As a child, I missed a lot of grade school because we were either fishing or hunting. So any of those things were more important than education. Culturally, we didn't learn the proper practices that even the bugs have a place in life. So we didn't learn to respect the water. We grew up knowing nothing of that.
I've always had a firm root in knowing who I was. I don't think as Indigenous people, we have an inherent connection with the earth. I think all people do. In spite of everything that's happened to us, I still get to remember.
So a crown makes a treaty with you and then puts you in their court to come to a resolution. Why don't they allow us First Nation court together and have them come into our court? We have the multitude of methods that the Crown has tried to impose on us to assimilate and get rid of us.
There's many times in the sessions where I said things and all the eyes would look up at me. So one was, you know, I've been over 20 years in the classroom and I've barely ever taught any Indigenous students. And the eyes all come up and they look at me and I'm like, what? Tammy, you taught a lot of Indigenous students. You just didn't know they were Indigenous. And I listened to these stories that these people were telling me and I was thinking, that can't be right because I have a degree in history. And then I'm checking and it's all true. All this story that happened to the original group of people in this country was just unknown to me. One of the most important things for me as a Catholic is to tell the bald truth. 60 to 70% of the residential schools were run by the Catholic Church.
And there's been talk too about trying to get the Pope to come to Canada to apologize. I see no other way that we will accept an apology. He has to come here to our people on our land and apologize.
I got a lot of messages that it was not good to be Indigenous, to be Cree. It was something to be ashamed of. All of the messages that I was receiving were negative.
I was just a child at the time, and I was having a really hard time, you know, trying to walk this fine line of being who I am and not losing myself. I didn't want to contribute to something that didn't even want me in the first place.
Mes grands-parents l'ont su, mais ils l'ont caché vraiment pour l'avenir des enfants. Fallait pas que je dise à mes amis, fallait que je garde ça un secret.
I'm 71 now, and you wouldn't believe how long it took me to peel the layers off about my issues with Christianity, which isn't to say I'm not a spiritual person. So much wrong, so much crime was put onto our parents. I've had uncles share with me horror stories. And you know something? They'd be the first one to take a bullet for the church. And that's always confused me.
Yeah, I blame right from the Queen to the government to the church. I blame them all. And yet we're still here.
And then when I would go to confession every Thursday, the priest would tell me, your mother's a sinner because she goes to the other church. So that priest that was saying that to me was the same priest that was sexually abusing my brother behind the altar. And the bishops knew he was a pedophile, and they would send pedophiles either to Native communities or Black communities. Geez, I wonder why, because people of color have no value. So this priest was in our community for a long time. And then my brother committed suicide when he was in his middle 30s. This one Jesuit that came to our meetings, he would stand in front of me and wanting to talk to the father of my children. He never wanted to talk to me. So that was our first meeting, and there was many in my community that were sexually abused by that priest that were in that meeting. My brother stood outside of that circle, and after that meeting was done, he says to me, you know, sis, he goes, I'm glad somebody's finally talking about this. The next morning, he hung himself. And before I walked out, my mother was sitting in front of me, and I says to my mother, I says, I'm so glad that we're not Christian, if this is what Christianity is. And I thought, is that what good Catholic people do? tell you to be quiet because your brother committed suicide because of what a priest did to him. And I blame that religious institution for turning our people against our own people. And not once has a Catholic person ever stood in front of my mother and said, I'm sorry for what we did to your son. I'm sorry what we did to your children. I'm sorry what we did to your daughters. Not one.
The flag there that every child matters. Does it take that kind of dramatic event that is well known within Indigenous communities? But we have to prove every damn little blip in our history. And I'm speaking as a son of a residential school survivor.
My father never acknowledged me. My father was very violent. I was born into violence. I lived through violence. Because my father was Catholic, we were forced by the government for us to go to a Catholic school. The first year that I was in that school, this other girl and I got into a fight after recess, and she showed the nun that I had scratched her. So the nun strapped me with a strap about that long and about that thick, 10 times on each of my hands. And then at recess time, as the kids were going out to recess out the front door, and the nun was there and I was standing beside her, the kids had to come through this door to go out. She made every one of them hit me, slap me, or kick me. And it took me a long time to heal from that trauma, from that incident at 6 years old. What that meeting was about is how are we going to heal the people. I was the last one to speak, and I says, all I want is our community to be better. I don't care if people go back to church. I just want the sexual abuse to stop. And it has to stop now. There's sexual abuse. We need to look at it. We need to deal with it. And people need to heal from it. It's not even my fault that I don't speak my language. It is the Catholic Church and the Catholic school's fault. So the systems in their narrative knew if you destroyed Native women and you take their children away from them, you destroy the family, you destroy the community, you destroy the nation. We have thousands of missing and murdered Aboriginal people, not just women, but men and boys.
I had a teacher say to me that residential schools didn't exist. His name was Mr. Simmons.
And that's when they sent me to residential school. And I was 13 or 14 then. And I only stayed 1 year, but it was awful. When you get there, they put things in your hair. You're not even lousy, but they just assume you are. You have to wear that. Jump in a tub and they cut your toenails and fingernails and you put on these, I don't call it uniform, but everybody's dressed the same. And after that, you only get a bath once a week. Change your clothes every other week. And when you get there, you get a number. My number was 26. I still remember that. You were never called by your name. You were called by your number. And I posted on Facebook one day. In residential school, my name was 26. My real name is Nadjiwon. I go by my longhouse name. We've been trying to tell for years what has been going on. And it took the bodies of these little babies for Canada to wake up and know what's going on.
I hadn't graduated school. I was still in public school. My friend had just died, and I just had a breakdown. And for me, it was seeing like how many people I had known that weren't alive. Felt like no one really cared.
My father was one of the most successful poachers in the county. Isn't that sad for an Indigenous person to have to fend for his family? If he's found out he's going to be fined or go to jail. The reason he's doing that is he can't afford to go to the grocery store. We were walking around here like thieves in our own land. To get our burial ground notified, nothing was being done. So we got together one morning and we drove our cars into someone's backyard and we occupied the land. So I can remember when the RCMP and others went up to Darlene Johnson, our lawyer, and said, we're going to have to put a trespassing charge here. Very quick thinker. She said, good. Do you have their names? And they said, well, the names of the homeowners, because they're the ones that are trespassing.
We invited people to this land to live in accordance with our laws, to live as we would live, to live like the sun, to live like the water, to live like the grass. I don't think people understand that about the treaties. I think they see the treaties as a document that's about parceling out land, but it's like, no, come and live in accordance with Anishinaabe law. And with those treaties that are rooted in the earth and the water and in the sky, what we're trying to do is understand how we can be in a treaty relationship with this, not just physically renewing those sources of life, but the emotional, the psychological, like the love, the kindness, the respect, the honesty, the truth, the wisdom, right? Those grandmother and grandfather teachings that we have.
I have uncles and cousins on that side. My grandparents are on that side. Great-grandparents. I got to meet a lot of them this summer, which was really good for me. And it was just great to have that sense of belonging. Most of my life I didn't know they even existed. So it was great to come back into contact with that side of my family.
I do believe in education. I do believe that universities have a role and a responsibility to educate the future generations. And I do very much believe that Indigenous peoples play a big part of that. I got into university through the back door. I always frame it that way because I got in through a bridging program. But I stumbled across Aboriginal studies. That for me was a complete moment of transformation, because I remember who was teaching that course. I remember the room number. I remember where I sat. Having Indigenous peoples in these spaces makes a huge, huge difference.
We can't be the kind of people we are unless we allow the respect. The way I like to talk about the 7 grandfather teachings is they're only words. Truth, honesty, love. They only become a reality when you incorporate them into who you are. It's like medicines. Sweetgrass, cedar, sage, tobacco, plants. They become something when you put the belief into that medicine and incorporate it into who you are. Then it is something. It is something.
Healing isn't just a 1-week job, a 1-month job. It's a lifetime journey.
It's my own people that healed me. It didn't go to no non-native institution to go help me. The Catholic educational system displaced us and made us separate from our heart, our mind, our body, and our spirit. It's time to rebuild that and bring it back together. And I met this man. He was a Plains Cree from out west, and I gave him tobacco and I asked him to be my uncle. And this man was an ex-priest. And my sister and I would go sit and talk with him. When he took my tobacco, he made a commitment to me that he would be my uncle and that he would help me and he would guide me and he would support me. We would sit and ask him about why he became a priest. And he says, I became a priest because I wanted to help the people. Then the question was, so why did you leave? And he says, because I met this woman and she was a teacher and I fell in love with her. And now the elders gave him a pipe and he was a pipe carrier. And he goes, that is more powerful than standing in front in any church. He goes, because this is our church. And he was just one of the most kindest men that I have ever met in my life. I just absolutely loved him. And he truly did guide me to another level of my awareness and my understanding about who I am. Maybe one day I can forgive the Catholic Church. I'm not quite there yet. But I sat with this lawyer a couple of weeks ago who's a Catholic man, and I was sharing with him, maybe one day I can go step in that Catholic Church, and when I can step in that Catholic Church and feel it's just a building, then I know I'm on the other side. And he says to me, Liz, I will go with you and walk with you there. And my voice got really shaky, I almost cried. And I says, okay, I says, but not today. And even my ex-partner who's in Creator's World, he'd always tell me, he goes, you know, Nisit Tongkwe, one day you need to forgive those priests and those nuns. And I says, well, I'm going to need to do a lot of healing around that. And I've had moments of it. And I've even had moments of forgiving that pedophile priest that sexually abused my brother. I have had moments of it. But I want to be able to stay in it.
But if you can find a way to face the pain and not get crushed by it, then it allows you to recognize yourself in all of those folks, both those that have caused pain and those that have been hurt and are still in pain. The humanity of this is that we're all in this together. This pain is still going on, right? Colonialism is not something that's in the past, it's a present event. 64% of kids in care in British Columbia, for instance, are Indigenous kids right now. 80 to 90% of the people in prison in Saskatchewan are Indigenous right now. That pain isn't just residential school era, it's also this era too. But just because you feel pain doesn't mean that's all you can feel. Sometimes by feeling pain, you actually then appreciate those moments of joy and possibility. If we're to get through this, we have to get through this in a way that draws from just eyes wide open to all the beauty and all the hurt.
I was doing a presentation with some women from Western, and there was a woman sitting there, and I was sharing a story about my brother. And this woman stood up, and she says, I'm a nun. And she says, I need to tell you, I'm sorry. I'm sorry what my church did to you. And I walked over to her, and I hugged her, and we both cried. So that's truth and reconciliation. The educational systems and institutions step aside and give us the space and the resource. We will do our own land-based teachings. So we can have our ceremonies, our language. Give us one of your parks. Let us build our land-based teaching space and healing space. You want truth and reconciliation? Then give us the means so that we can have that. You come to us and we'll teach you about who we are.
Our stories, they continue to be told around our kitchen tables, around our sacred fires. And now I think there's this movement, this mass movement among many Indigenous peoples to return to that and to not assimilate. And that's because we are getting supported more than ever by educational institutions the way that they should have initially been.
What happened in Oneida. So they decided to create their own educational system, but we're going to teach it from an Aboriginal perspective. So it was traditional knowledge, but it was also delivered by the people of the community, aunts and uncles and grandparents that they knew, because they wanted them to see it, not just to talk about it, read it about it in a book. And I think that kind of learning is what's needed. Back to the land. I went there one time and they brought the kids in and they did the Haudenosaunee address. And that's the prayer they do, and they thank the Creator for all the things that He has given and the responsibility that those things were charged with. And they did it all in the Oneida language. Almost every kid that ever came out of that school went on to higher learning.
The week before I started coming to school, they had this whole course on Lenape culture. And I had never had a school that had a course fully on Indigenous culture. I was just amazed to hear people excited to hear what I had to tell them about my own culture. Growing up, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, so my grandma basically raised me. I grew up more in the Indigenous culture, and I just felt so happy and so proud. I know who I am, and I'm so proud of it.
We are growing in number. We are stronger. I went back to our ceremonies. I went back to our stories. And so it was through that process that I started to realize that our education is much broader than how I had previously conceived of school and education. Education happens everywhere. It doesn't just happen in the written word.
I didn't know our people had ceremonies. And so I went and changed my life. I heard the teachings. I sat with the grandmothers and the grandfathers. But our people need to heal our people. Our people need to teach our own people. Because we do know the history. We do know about land-based connection. Truth and reconciliation. I don't need to reconcile with you. You need to reconcile with me. Do I hold the truth? Yes, I do. Inside of my being, I know and believe and understand that everything that I do and everything that I have done affects me, my children, my grandchildren, but affects my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. That is the power in our healing of our medicines and our ceremonies and the way that we see the world. The only way that this is going to change is to create relationships. Because everything in our cultural way of being is about relationships. We all have a heart, mind, body, and spirit. The old people always say, learn about who you are, and then you'll know and understand about other people. It's healing, and non-Native people need to do their healing, and they need to stand in their own truth, no matter how hard that is. We've had to continue to stand in our own truth of the mental, emotional, physical, sexual, and spiritual abuse in our families, in our community, and in our nation.
I think what my mom did, she came to the world with her hand joined to her mother and father. And there was all of that pain that came to her. And she also had the love of the land and the water. She had the appreciation for what these all teach us. And so that came through her. And then I'm born. I'm then connected to her hand. And what she tried to do was have all of that garbage stop here and allow to pass through as much good as she possibly could. Right, so there she is with hands between generations as a transitional figure, really. And, you know, to bear that pain and to have that lodge and say, that's it, that's going to stop. That's not going to go to my kids. And then to be the recipient with my hand held to my mother of all that incredible beauty is, you know, she did it.
And the classroom is not just the four walls. The classroom is a spiritual thing. It's the space that you hold for that learning out of respect for the learners. It is a beautiful thing. It really does change the world.
Nuance is sacred. I think that's so powerful. And you can see someone's beauty and not neglect or ignore those other parts of them, but there's beauty there. We're just so complicated. And if we can triangulate or see how the stories relate to one another, we'll find each other there. Just think of the shades of color right now as the evening falls. Right? If that's not a lesson in nuance, to think about all the grayscale, that it's just subtle. Or you think about how the ecology is put together, there's just so many stories that are intertwining here. And that's here too, right? So what I would say is it's find that beauty, find that nuance, find the possibility for people to be many things. It just gives you peace.
Beginning it says on stolen land. It's both stolen and still ours. It's theirs. That is, it is the birds and the trees and the plants and the fish. And so as we go through the film, I see it's not been stolen from us. I see it lives here, it lives out there. And maybe people will pick up on that and they'll understand that this cannot be stolen despite those attempts. but it's still our land, or more importantly, it's still their land.